then we end with some final recommendations where I've basically gone through all the chapters and I've pulled out microbiome-specific recommendations in each chapter and kind of given them to you here in your really high-level Cliff Notes version of the report. And so I think I'll go to soil pathogens, and then we'll take a break and we can ask some questions and for those of us who have those kinds of interests, and then we'll move on, which is the second half of the story is more really kind of microbiome focused. The first half, I think, is more about soils and or microbial pathogens. So the first part of the story is relying on this idea of soil services. Soil services is a more traditional word. In this report, we use the word nature's contribution to people, which is a little broader spanning, and it deals with material contributions, regulating services, and non-material services. So really celebrating the value that soils play in humanity. And I'm going to walk you through some of those. Before we get into it, I wanted to kind of harness that we went back and forth because as you saw in that statement of task, the statement of task calls out microbes. It's not calling out biodiversity. But when we work, those of us who work in soils, we know that you can't talk about soils from only a microbial perspective. And so oftentimes, we were very clear to talk about the biodiversity of these systems. These are complex food webs. We have red or green and brown food webs moving through these systems, and they're all interdependent based on earthworms and beetles and all of these other components. And so we really made a point to use the word biodiversity when we were talking about this broader life in soils, and microbes or microbiomes when we're really talking about that life that is invisible, that basically resides at that 1 millimeter size and below. So protozoan, fungi, bacteria, viruses. This is a figure that somebody gave me, and actually I think it's an underrepresentation of life in biodiversity in soils, but I don't have to spend much time, I don't think, convincing this audience of that. Okay, so the first thing that we felt compelled to do was talk about, because oftentimes I think the historical view is that soils, especially agricultural soils, are widgets, right? They're widgets that we turn to enhance for food production, fiber, and fuel. They give us resources. And that's how, the kind of the context. I mean, I'm in the College of Ag at Colorado State University, and that is a kind of a framing. It's a feature we can use, we can manipulate it, and we can have an output. That output is often yield, not even nutrition. So that's a really kind of important conversation that I think Callie led the chapter on, and I'd love, to get some feel for that. But this provision of food, fiber, and fuel. So soils give us that. But what we don't appreciate, or what the broader audience may not appreciate, is all the other things that soils give us. And so we all know that when we talk about nutrient cycling in soils, we're really talking a lot about microorganisms, right? They are our enzymatic engines in soils. You can talk about nitrogen, you can talk about phosphorus, you can talk about carbon, you can talk about sulfur, you can talk about any of the things that we all think about. These are all catalyzed from microbes. Also, it turns out microbes and their biomass contribute to how soils aggregate and their texture and their constituency, which has so the physical properties of soils are derived from microbes and their biomass. And so microbes then therefore play a really important role in how we purify water, in erosion, and even how we process soil contaminants. I think the world is more comfortable with the idea, maybe, of carbon sequestration and climate regulation, but again, we were surprised that the statement of task, I think, was written so narrow when soils do so much for humanity, and that really wasn't called out in the statement of task. It was really like the statement of task read like, talk to us about pathogens, and we really felt like there was so much more that soils provide us with that to not do that justice would be a shame on our part as a committee. And then habitat for organisms. And one of the things in terms of nature's contributions to people, we figured if we couldn't convince people to be interested in soils for all the reasons that I just told you, like climate regulation, where our food comes from, that we have safe drinking water, maybe the fact that they also are this biodiversity in soils is just this untapped reservoir for new chemistry and new compounds. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But we have basically a section on nature, in the nature's contributions to people's chapter, which is chapter 4, basically on the pharmaceuticals and the products that are derived in soils. And we had some great seminar speakers talking about the future of medicinals in this country and the role that soils play in that perspective. All right, the next section was on soil pathogens. And the approach that here is now is like where the microbiome meets food systems and how that impacts human health. So basically we go from the soil microbiome to food systems and food outputs, and how can that affect human health. The lever that we're going to pull is the agricultural practices, and those agricultural practices are going to mediate the microbiome, which could have outputs on the food system. The direction that we took here was really focusing on kind of three main routes. We're going to start with the others. We have a box, so you can, should I tell them the secret squirrel of what goes in the box? The secret squirrel for what goes in the box is, yeah, we know it's important, but everybody already knows this, and so we don't feel like this is the best use of an academy report to talk about that. But we don't want you to think that we don't know that it's important, so we're going to put it in the box. So that's the secret squirrel about things. Or it's, hey, this is really cool and sexy, so if you want to read the box, you'll be like, oh, that's what people know, or really exciting, but there's only one paper on it, but we felt like it should be mentioned. And so that also goes into a box. So I didn't appreciate the beauty of editing and what boxes mean, but now I have a new appreciation for what goes in boxes and reports. Don't tell anyone else, let's keep moving on. Okay. So in the other routes, we talk about soils in terms of wounds getting infected with tetanus. We talk about inhalation with valley fever and histoplasma and things like that. But really, the focus of our report, those happen in croplands and other soils. That statement of task, and the one that we had to keep coming back to, was the role in agriculture.